Today's daf yomi is Zevachim 101. We're going to start on the bottom of 100 and B, 5 lines from the bottom. The Gemara said the position of Rebbe that he said Amru Kamei de Rava. So the Gemara discussed the position of Rebbe in front of Rava, and he said, I'm a Rebbe, Yom Kvura Tofes Leil Midrabanan. From the fact that Rebbe says that the day of the burial, as opposed to the day of the death, then that night, the aninus, the laws of being an onain, i.e., that more intense laws of mourning, if the fact that the day of the burial is that night is rabbinic, miklal, the yom misa, so we have to go up one step when it's the day of the death, which is more intense level of aninus, tofes leil midioraisa. That's going to say that if the day of the burial's night is rabbinic, then the day of the death's night is going to be biblical. So the Gemara says, wait 1 second, we're at the bottom of 100b. Visava Rebbe, Aninus Leila Diarai. So is Rebbe really of the position that the night after the death, that night, the laws of Aninus extend and it's biblical? Vatanya, and the Gemara is going to go into a story. We're going to spend most of the daf discussing the story about the interaction between Aaron and Moshe, that there were 3 korbanos that Aaron brought on the day of the Miluim, on the day of the inauguration of the Mishkan. And Moshe wanted to know why Aaron, now that day Nadav and Avihu died. So Aaron was an onain. So Moshe asked him why he and his children did not eat from the sa'ir, the goat of the chatas of Rosh Chodesh while we were in their state of aninus, just like Moshe had commanded them. Moshe told them. Remind ourselves, on the first day of Nisan, that was when the Mishkan was dedicated. And that's when Nadav and Avihu were killed by Hashem. And so Moshe, on that day, in chapter 10 of Vayikra, Moshe commanded Aaron and his children to eat the kachim, even though they were owning him. And that was a special horasha. And they did that. They ate the mincha and they ate the shlomim. But the sayir achatas that is brought on every Rosh Chodesh, that they did not eat and they burnt it, because they said this horasha, this extenuating circumstances that would allow them to eat from the aninus, that was only with respect to those karbanos that were special for the yom of the dedication of the Mishkan. But now with respect to the karbanos that were for Doros, as we're going to explain on our daf. I just gave you the summary. So he says, Moshe says to Aaron, Hein hayom hikrivu, and meaning to say that Moshe says to Aaron, Aaron says, they were brought today, and I ate the chatas hayom. Would it have been good in the eyes of Hashem? Meaning to say, if I would have eaten this chatas, would it have been good? Meaning to say, from the words Hein hayom, that implies that, did you hear from Hashem that I should eat the chatas specifically? Ani hayom asur, that means to say that the day is prohibited to eat it, this chatas, b'layla mutter, but that night would have been permitted. Udoros, but in future generations, the karbanos that were for future generations, bein bayom, bein b'layla asur, divrei Rabbi Yehuda. For future generations, Rabbi Yehuda says that Aaron was saying for future generations, the day and the night will be prohibited. Whereas Rabbi Omer, Aninos Laila Eina Midivrei Torah Ela Midivrei Sofim. Whereas Rabbi says no, the Aninos at night is only not from the Torah, but only rabbinically. Anyway, we see from here that Rabbi's position is not that Aninos that night is biblical; it's rabbinic. Gemara says, "La'olam derabbanan." Gemara says, really, Rabbi says the Aninos at night is rabbinic. The Chachamim asu chizku devreim yoser mishal Torah, and then the Chachamim, even though the aninus on the day of the death, which is biblically speaking, is not really aninus, the Chachamim who established the aninus on the day of the burial also said that the night after, it also said that the day of the death they did it as the rabbinic law. But so now the Gemara goes into this discussion on 101a. The Gemara goes into this discussion of what happened with this conversation between Moshe and Aaron, meaning to say, after Rabbi Yehuda brought a proof for his position that Aninos Laila is, biblically speaking, from the pasuk of the fact that Aaron said these words, Hein hayom, that were said on the 8th day of the Miluim. So the Gemara is going to now go into these verses of the karbanos that were brought on that 8th day. And the Gemara is going to show that there's a dispute here between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemiah. So let's just go over this major day in Jewish history. That on the 8th day of the Miluim, which was also Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which was also the second year in which the children of Israel left Egypt. And on that day, Nadav and Avihu were burned to death after they brought a Eish Zarah, foreign fire, on the altar. And on that day, that was the day in which the Mishkan was dedicated through the Nisiyim. We just read about this on Hanukkah, that the Nisiyim brought their karbanos. And Hashem said to Moshe that every day a Nasi should bring his karban. And on this day, this first day of the inauguration of the Mishkan, not only was it the first day of Rosh Chodesh, but Nachshon ben Aminadav brought his karban. So we see from here, aside from the chatas, the Sayar chatas of the inauguration, there was also the two other chatas offerings, the chatas of Rosh Chodesh and the chatas of Nachshon. So there are three chatas that day. And the Sayar of Rosh Chodesh, Aaron and his sons burnt. The other two chatas they ate, but the Sayar of Rosh Chodesh, they burnt them, they did not eat it. So, as it says in the pasuk, Darosh Darash Moshe V'nei Soraf. Moshe looked. This is actually the middle word of the Torah. Darosh Darash Moshe looked, and behold, it was burnt. And behold, it was burnt. So so why did Aaron not eat it? Moshe got upset. Tanu Rabbanan. So the Brisa says, with respect to the mincha that was brought on the 8th day of Miluim, it says, Moshe says you should eat this mincha because indeed I commanded it. And it says with respect to the chatos of Rosh Chodesh that Aaron burnt, you shall eat it in the Kodesh just like I commanded. And Moshe said to them that they had to eat it. And also it says with respect to the Shalmei Tzibor that Moshe says to Aaron and his children, Kasher tzivah Hashem. You should eat it just like God commanded. So they were commanded to eat the chatos of Rosh Chodesh, the chatos of the Miluim, and the shlamim of the Miluim. And so the Gemara says, Kichein tuvesi. What does it say 3 times? What does Hashem command Moshe? Aninus yochua, that you should eat it even though you're in a state of aninus, even if Nadav and Avihu have died, that you should still eat the mincha. Kasher tzivesi. B'shas Ma'aseh, and that this tells us that Moshe reminded them that when Nadav and Avihu died, Amar, and he said you should eat the kachim even though you're in a state of aninus. And then Kasher Tiva, because Hashem specifically said that you should eat it even though you're in a state of aninus. And Kasher Tiva Hashem, and then Moshe reminds them, Lo me'elai ani omer, I'm not saying this on my own, but it's from God. But the Gemara says Veramini, but we have a contradiction for this price. So because it says Ninos Nisrafa, why did he burn the chatos of Rosh Chodesh? Because he was in a state of Aninos, that Aaron was an onin. Therefore it says that Aaron said to Moshe, Vatikrana osika ela. These things happened to me today, and my 2 children died. How am I going to eat the karban? And Moshe heard this, Vayishma Moshe Vayita Vonim. Moshe heard this and it was good. So in one source it says that they did not eat it. And in the other source, it says in one source Moshe says he told them from Hashem not to eat it. But in the other source he agreed that in one source Moshe told them to eat it. In the other source he told them not to eat it. So how is this the case? So Amar Shmuel, Shmuel says it's not difficulty. That how to explain the 2 different prices? There are 2 different opinions. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Nechemiah. One price is Rabbi Yehuda, one is Rabbi Nechemiah. Ditanya, that why was it burnt? This is the position of Rabbi Nechemiah. It was burnt because it was an onin. That's why Aaron responds that these things happened to me today. That Nadav and Avihu died, and I'm an onin, and so therefore I have to burn it. Rabbi Nechemiah, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, no. Why was the chatas of Rosh Chodesh burnt? Because it was tamei, because something tamei touched it, and he couldn't eat it. And so it was not because of aninus. Shema tomer me aninus nisrafa. They should have also burnt the mincha and the shlamim and the shlamim. So the fact that only the chatas of Rosh Chodesh was burnt, it tells us that it wasn't because of aninus. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. Whereas Rabbi Nechemiah says, the reason why He says it was burned because of aninus, and Rabbi Yehuda says it was burned because of tuma. Davar acher, a further proof that Rabbi Yehuda says don't say it was burned because there was an onen. Hayaroi la'ochon erev, because they could have still eaten it that night because they were aninos during the day, but that night they would have been able to eat it because it wouldn't extend. Davar acher, and a further proof that they didn't have to burn it. Why did they have to burn it? Pinchas, who was a Kohen, he could have eaten it with them. He was their son. And Pinchas was the son of Elazar. And Elazar, so therefore he was only the nephew of Nadav and Avihu. So he was not an onen. He could have eaten it. So therefore, that's why Rabbi Yehuda says it was burned not because of aninos, but because of tumah. So then the Gemara says, Rava Amar Idi v'Idi Rabbi Nechemia. Rava says both of these braisos are the position of Rabbi Nechemia. Kasha, and it's meaning to say Rabbi Nechemia says that it was burned because of aninos. So then why does it say that? Why does one brisa say I told you to eat it in aninos, and the other brisa says Aaron's response? That if it was when was he told not to eat in a state of aninos? That was the karbanos that was for all future generations. That was the karban of the chatos of Rosh Chodesh. But the karbanos that were just for that moment, i.e. the shlamim and the mincha, those are just for that moment. Those he was allowed to eat, or he was commanded to eat in the state of aninos. So Moshe said, eat the chatos, eat the mincha and aninos, and also the shlamim, because those are just the days of the mihuim. So it's once in history. So therefore you eat it. But unlike the chatos of Rosh Chodesh, that he doesn't eat. So the Gemara says, so now the Gemara wants to know, how did Rabbi Nechemia, who says that the reason why Aaron burnt it was because he was an onen, how does he explain the psukim in Parashas Shmini? Rabbi Nechemia, cry. How does Rabbi Nechemia going to explain the psukim? Rabbanon, and Rabbi Yehuda says it was burnt because of tumah. How does he explain the psukim? Rabbi Nechemia explains it like this: that Moshe says to Aaron, "Madua lo achaltem? Why don't you eat the chatos today?" Amar lo Moshe Aaron. Moshe says to Aaron, "What's the reason why you didn't eat the chatos today? Shema nichnas damo lefnei lefnim. Did you bring the blood accidentally or did you bring the blood into the sanctuary, which would disqualify it? Was the chatas disqualified, and therefore you burnt it? Amar lo, no, hein lo vastamo. He said, no, I didn't bring the blood into the sanctuary. So he says, shema chutz l'mechitzasa, because the pasuk says hein lo vastamo. So shema chutz l'mechitzasa yatos. Maybe you brought the blood outside of the curtains of the Mishkan, of the courtyard, and that's why it was disqualifying. That's why you burnt it. He said, no, I'm all b'kodesh. I said, no. It never went anywhere. So Dilma Baninos Ikriv Tua Upisol Tua. So Moshe says there, maybe the reason why you burned it was because you brought it in a state of Aninus. Amar lo, Moshe. He says, Aaron said to Moshe, no. Vichi Heimi Krivu Ani Krafti. They're not the ones who brought it. I brought it, and I'm allowed to bring in a state of Aninus because I'm the Kohen Gadol. Amar lo, Hein Luvos Tuma. And Moshe says to Aaron, well, Uva Kodesh I saw Achol Tachuasa Kasher Tivesi. So Moshe says to Aaron, well, if you didn't bring the blood in, and also it never left the courtyard of the Mishkan, then why didn't you eat it like I commanded you to eat it? So he says to them, Kasher Tivesi Aninos Yochul, just like I commanded it to you by the mincha that you should eat it. You shouldn't have burnt it. So Aaron said to Moshe, Amar lo vatikrena osi ka'eleh. He says, I'm an onain. These things happened to me today. That Nadav and Avihu died. Am I supposed to eat it in the state of Aninos? So Aaron continues, Shema lo shemata el b'kache shah, the b'kache doros. So he says, maybe when you told me to eat from the Aninos, that was only the once in a lifetime, once in history karbanos, the minchas shlamim of the miluim, those are the one time. That's the time you told me to eat in the state of. That's what you heard from Hashem, that I should eat it. But by something that was going to be sacred for future generations, that I can eat it next month. Doros, but for the future generations, I'll prove to you I wasn't supposed to eat it. Kal v'chomer mi meiser akal. I'll prove it to you from meiser sheni. Ma meiser akal, just like meiser sheni. Amra Torah lo achalti ba'onim mimenu. The Torah says, don't eat the Ma'aser Sheni when you're an onain. Kadshe doras lo kol shekain. For sure, I shouldn't eat something that is more severe than Ma'aser Sheni. And so, because how do we know it's more lenient? Because it could be eaten by anyone, not just by a Kohen. But there are some areas where it's more severe. Tosos asked that question that because you need a specific type of coin to redeem it. So anyway, but the assumption is Ma'aser Sheni is much more lenient because it can even be in all of Jerusalem and also by non-Kohanim.
If you weren't qualified to make the sacrifice.
If you're not qualified to make the sacrifice, you can't. There was whether or not you get a portion of it. But Aaron was qualified to make the sacrifice, but he just couldn't eat. No, he was qualified for sure. He was qualified to make the sacrifice in the state of Aninos. The question is whether he should eat it. Moshe told him to eat it, and Aaron said, "I can't eat it. I'm an onain, even though I was able to bring it."
If he were, because he was qualified to make the sacrifice.
Right, exactly. So the Gemara says, so Aaron's response to Moshe was by Ma'aser Sheni, where I can't eat it if in that state of Aninus, for sure this Kache Doros, for sure I can't eat it. And when Moshe heard this Kal V'chomer from Aaron, he said, you know what? Miyad Vayishva Moshe Vayitav Beinav. Moshe heard this, and he liked what Aaron says. Hodav lo boch Moshe Omar lo shamati. Moshe wasn't embarrassed to say, oh, actually, I never heard that. He said, oh, actually, I heard it, but I forgot it. Moshe admitted that what Aaron came on his own logic was exactly what Hashem said, and Moshe just forgot it. Why did Moshe forget? How can Moshe forget? So how could he forget? He forgot. That's what it was. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, that he forgot because he was angry. Who's the source for that? Or Ayashar. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, how do Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon explain these psukim? So Gemara says, so this is how, again, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, they say it wasn't burnt because of Aninus, was burnt because it was Tamei. So Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, how do they explain it? So they say the psukim like this: why didn't you eat the chatas? Why did you burn it? Did you bring the blood inside? Amrlo, no. No, I didn't bring the blood into the sanctuary. So maybe you maybe you brought it outside the courtyard. He says, no, it was in the courtyard the whole time. Maybe you brought it in the state of Aninus. Moshe. I brought it. I'm the Kohen Gadol. I'm allowed to. So he says, Videlma, now there's an additional line. So Moshe says to Aaron, Dilma agav miri raichu pashatabu vitami. Maybe because you were so upset. Maybe because you were so upset about what happened to Nadav and Avihu, you rebelled and you made it tamei, and you rebelled. Amrlo Moshe, kachani beinecha shani mevaze kodesh shemayim. You think that I would do this? I would desecrate kodesh shemayim? That it says in the pasuk that these things happened to me, and I would desecrate it. Even if much worse happened. I would never desecrate Kodesh Shemayim. Amrlo v'lo uvasta v'hein lo uvasta ma v'kodesh ha'isa chol tachutz v'kodesh kasher tivesi. So Moshe says, so why didn't you eat it then? Because by the mincha ba'aninos yochula. Amrlo shemelo shamata el balayla says when you heard that aninos should be eaten, that's only at night. But the bayom kavachomer in ma'aser kol. Ma ma'aser kol amar Torah lo chalti ba'oni. Kodesh Chomer or Kol Shekain. So just like by Meiser Akol, so he says maybe so different Kal Chomer before. He says when you heard about Meiser, you could eat it. That when you heard about the other ideas that you should eat it on Ninos, that was only by the that was only during the day. But at night, it says Shemelo Shamati El Balel. When you heard that you could eat that in Aninos, that was only at night. Bayom, but during the day, Kal Chomer Meiser Kal. But we learned from Meiser Kal, Ma Meiser Kal Amra Torah Lo Chalti Boni Menu Kal Chomer or Kol Shekin. So for sure we shouldn't eat it. For sure we shouldn't eat it. V'yad vayishva Moshe v'itav beina. Moshe heard this and it was good as eyes. Well, Bo Shlomar, we're not on top of 101b. He was embarrassed to say, "Lo shamati, el shamati v'shechachti." So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, if Aaron was saying that he just couldn't eat it when he was allowed to eat it in the state of Aninos, that was only at night, but during the day he couldn't eat it. So So he said, why didn't Aaron wait till that night to eat it? Why did he burn it? So the Gemara says, no, because in the meantime, while I was lying around waiting to be eaten, it became tamei. So Aaron should have. So then the commentaries point out, well, if that's the case, well, then why did Aaron say, no, I couldn't eat it because I was an onain. I could only eat it at night. So why did he give the answer? Why didn't he give the answer that it was tamei? That's a different question. But anyway, according to one approach, it was burnt because he was an onain. According to the other approach, well, he could have eaten it that night, even though he was an onain. He couldn't eat it during the day, but could have eaten that night. But he was tamei. It became tamei. Mar says Bishlam or Rabbanan. It makes sense according to Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan, who say that the reason why he couldn't eat it during the day, that it was an onain during the day, but at night he could have eaten them. That's why it says hayom. Should I eat it today? Because today it's prohibited, but tonight it would be permitted. El Rabbi Nechemia Mayayom. What does it emphasize the day? Chovas hayom. It means to say that Aaron was saying that, meaning to say that the sha'iti offerings that are obligated today, i.e., just that for the specific ones for all generations, i.e., and not for just that moment. They'll go to verse Chodesh. Bishlam Rabbi Nechemia Hainu Dilsiv Hein Hayom. It makes sense why Rabbi Nechemia, who says that that the Karche Shah were permitted to eat, but not the Karche Doros. That's why it says Hein Hayom, means to say they were brought today, just for today, that for all future generations. That's why we can't eat it. El Rabbanan, my Hein Hayom. What it means is Heini Krivu, did they bring it? Ani crafted. And even though I'm an onain, I was allowed to bring it because I'm the Kohen Gadol. So we go back now to look at the Brisa that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon argued that there were three difficulties on Rabbi Nechemia about the Aninos. Maybe it was because of Aninos, because of the blood, it went out. Amar Mar, Hayu Shloshtan Sheyisarfu. So it said in the Brisa, Rabbi Yehuda said to Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon said to Nechemia that according to your approach, because of Aninos it was burnt, why didn't they burn all three? Why didn't they burn the Mincha and the Shlomim? Mashal Oshtan, which three? The Tanya Vesera Chatas Darosh Darash Moshe. Oh, so not the Mincha and Shlomim, the goat of the other Seirim. They should have also burned. It says Vesera Chatas Darosh Darash Moshe. Sa'ir Zu Nachshon. When it says this, the ear there refers to the goat of Nachshon that was brought that day. Chata Zu Chata Shmini. That's the chatas that was brought on the 8th day of the Muluim. Darash. Sa'ir Shalosh Chodesh. Those were the three karbonos that day. Yachol Shloshta Nisrafu. I might think that all three of them were burnt. Talmumar V'nei Soraf. Echa Nisrafu Shloshta Nisrafu. Only one of them was burnt, i.e., the goat of Rosh Chodesh. Darosh Darash. Straight Drishot Lamali. This is actually the middle words of the Torah. Darosh Darash. So the middle by counting by words. So why did it say Darosh twice? Amar Reuben, they make chatas do nisrafa. Why is this chatas burnt? The elu minachos, but the other chatos are left to nightfall. They were just not eaten that day. The eniodea ezu, and the Brisa says, I don't know which goat was burnt. Shomer v'osana salachem waseitz lavona aida. And it was the chatos that was a sin offering. Omer zet tzayir shorosh chodesh, because we already learned that the goat of Nachshon was called a chatos, but we already said in our Masechta that it was just actually an oah. It wasn't atoning for anything. So the Gemara says, so you had a question, Harold? And is eaten. Always completely burnt the chatas is eaten, but this one is called a chatas, even though it wasn't brought for a sin, but it was eaten. So the Gemara says, Shapir Kamar away. So Rabbi Yehuda is asking good to Rabbi Nechemiah because it proves from the Pesukim that only the goat of Rosh Chodesh was burnt. But according to Rabbi Nechemiah, he should have burnt also all three of them. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Nechemiah Tamei Damar Kachi Shal Apostle Bilu. He says the ones that were just that moment, they were not disqualified because of Aninus. So what about the question, Amar Mar, Hayolola Chol Erev? That's a good question that Rabbi Nechemiah asked. That Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon said to Rabbi Nechemiah that according to you, that it's because of Aninus, he should have eaten it that night. Shaper Kamalei, Kasavar, no. Rabbi Nechemiah's other position is how we started, that the night after the death was also biblically prohibited of Aninus. But Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon didn't agree with that. Aninus Laila is the rights according to Rabbi Nechemiah. Davar Acher, what about another question? Why did he have to burn it? Why didn't he let Pinchas eat it? So Shapir Kamralu. So this is a good point that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon said to Nechemiah. Because Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon say it became tamei, so you had to burn it. According to you, okay, Aaron can't eat it, but Pinchas was also a Kohen. So several Rabbi Lazar, Damar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina, Lonis Kain, Pinchas Acha Hargo Zimri. Pinchas wasn't a Kohen yet. He only became a Kohen once Zimri was killed. Elazar and Itamar were Kohanim, but Pinchas wasn't a Kohen yet. He wasn't anointed. Why? A couple of theories. One is he was still a minor. Second theory was he wanted to make it special. Didn't want to make everybody be a Kohen yet. That after Pinchas killed Zimri, that's when Hashem made him a Kohen. So at that time, Pinchas was not yet a Kohen, so he couldn't eat it. Rav Ashi says, no, Pinchas only became a Kohen. Pinchas only became a Kohen when he brought peace between the tribes. As it says, Vayishma Pinchas HaKohen, Messiah Davar Asher Alfei Yisrael. So there was, at the end of the book of Joshua, there was almost a civil war, and Pinchas brought peace between the tribes. So that's when he became a Kohen. That's when he's called Pinchas HaKohen. So what is the second approach? What does Rav Ashi do with the fact that the pasuk says when he killed Zimri, he became a Kohen? So that tells us that Pinchas, that he in the end he will be blessed to be a Kohen. What does the first position of Rebbe Lazar in the name of Rebbe Chanina, what does he say about the fact that it says Vayishma Pinchas HaKohen? That's telling us that not only was Pinchas a Kohen, but also his descendants after him became Kohanim. That's what it's telling us. Amarav Moshe Rabbeinu Kohen Gadol v'Cholik b'Kodesh Shemayim. During the week before that first day, that fateful first day, there was an inauguration of the Mishkan for a week. Aaron and his sons did the service. That whole week, Moshe Rabbeinu was doing all the service. So now we have a question. So says Rav, that whole week Moshe Rabbeinu was the Kohen Gadol, the Cholik b'Kodesh Shemayim, and he got the portion that was reserved for the Kohanim. As it says, Moshe got a portion from the ram of inauguration. Meisvei, so the Gemara says, so you said, why did he burn it? Pinchas was with them. Okay, Pinchas wasn't a Kohen yet. But Moshe, if you said, Rob says Moshe was a Kohen Gadol, Moshe could have eaten it. Gemara says, leave Moshe alone. Moshe was with God. He wasn't there. He was communing with God. Every morning he went up to Mount Sinai, and he during the Miluim, and he was there in Sinai. He didn't have time. He wasn't around to eat the carbon. Meisvei, Gemara says, how could Rav say Moshe was the Kohen Gadol? It says with respect to the Kohanim who have blemish that the food of God from the Kodshim they should eat. Im nemru Kodshim. Lama nemru koche kalim. Koche kachim is when it tells me koche kachim umina kachim, which is the kachim kam. But once it says that the Kohen was a blemish, can eat from the koche kachim, for sure can eat from the koche kam. And nemru koche kalim, lama nemru koche kachim. And if it says koche kalim, why does it have to say? Then why does it say koche kachim? So the Gemara says, well, ilo nemru koche kalim. If it wouldn't have emphasized that the Baal Mum Kohen can eat the kachim kalim, I would have said he can only eat the kachim kachim Sharei hutro was zar v'lam, because kachim is. I would have said he could only eat the kachim because it was permitted for Moshe Rabbeinu also. But kachikalim will yochel, but he wouldn't be able to eat the kachikalim because the zar never got a portion of it, never divided it up. The ilu never kachikachim and didn't say kachikachim. I eat the omer kachikalim yochel. I would have said the kachikalim he could eat shem kalim, but the kachikachim will yochel, but he couldn't eat the kachikachim. Kachnamer kachikachim, kachnamer kachikachim. That's why that's say both. But anyway, we see from here katani miyasha hari hutra was zar lahen. That the kachikachim was allowed for a zar, i.e. Moshe, and them. So doesn't that, who is the zar was allowed? Allowed Moshe. And so we see from here that Moshe was not called a Kohen Gadol, he was called a zar. I mean, it's a little bit of a difficult question. So he says, Amar Shesh. Zar means a non-Kohen. So he says, no, when it says it was allowed for the zar, it's not referring to Moshe, it's referring to the fact that there was an altar outside the Beit HaMikdash during the time of the Bamos, which is what we're going to get into now. That was a person called a zar. He could eat the kachim. It follows position that you brought these kachim, which is a mincha, on the bama, and that you were allowed to eat. So we'll stop here. Pick this up tonight, and go over it again tomorrow. I'm still discussing this idea that Moshe Rabbeinu was the Kohen Gadol during the days of the Miluim. All right, we'll stop here. Baruch Hashem. Everybody have a good day. Shekayach.